Greetings, everyone. My name is Stephen Turner, and welcome to my implementation of a mechanic designed by a fellow classmate into this tile-based game project, Tournamental. The mechanic I've chosen to introduce into my game is a fireball spell with a destructible block and a pickup to go along with it. This mechanic was originally designed by Sean, and I apologize if I butcher the name, Traveser. But without further ado, I will show you how it works. Game here. So this is my normal level without anything going on. Energy shield block. Now we introduce the new level, the new mechanic. There are these red blocks that can only be destroyed by the fireball. So we learn fireball. So, and we now need to destroy multiple blocks in order to escape. Also, each cast of said fireball consumes stamina, so the player must be very strategic in their choices to cast said fireball. So here I just added teleport mechanic. That was odd. Never had that happen before. Just to go collect the fireball. The player has to move the block. That's it. Very simple and straightforward. A very simple and straightforward mechanic. Nothing too outstanding. So let's go through how the mechanic works, or the flow of it, I should say. So if we come into the player mechanic, we have, or the player entity, we have a spellcast that is on the Q key. When pressed, it identifies if the player has stamina left and can cast the spell, so it begins the preparing of the current spell. Then when the button is released, it checks again if the player can cast a spell, checks if the player still has stamina, and then casts a spell. It also begins playing a sound cue, which I was rather fond of. I'm a big fan of Baldur's Gate, so I made a simple little Ignis fireball sound to go with it, and then it consumes stamina when it casts. I just used the default stamina use mechanic that is already built in. At one point I was going to try to also make it use mana, but I decided that I wanted to have a single resource for the player. So went with that, made it cost 10 stamina, so it's fairly hefty cost, and there's a limited number of uses. In addition to that, I have the simple player has spell. This just checks to make sure that the player's spell count is above -1. -1 means that the player is incapable of casting a spell, so as long as it is greater than 0, they can cast a spell. Alright, so that was all that I did inside of the player entity. From there, we have the BP for the fireball. This primarily just sets up any initializing collision, the projectile movement, its velocity, and this is also where the fireball damage value is handled. Currently it is set to 1 by default. From here you have the fireball pickup. This is the actual tile. I used a message tile as its parent because I also wanted to have a simple message play when the player interacted with it without having to add additional functionality or code that functionality on its own. So I followed along with Sean here. I very much did not want the player to just be able to constantly step on top of it and collect more and more fireballs, or interact in some way that could break it by having multiple fireballs on the map. So simple do once on pickup, it destroys both the sphere and fire components so that there's nothing remaining, both the sphere and the fire effect. Here we have the actual fireball spell component. This is what allows the player to prepare, cast, and updates the location of the fireball while it is being done. Yep. So here, this again, much following right along with Sean's setup. Prepares fireball, saves a reference while enabling the tick for the actor. This casts the fireball and sets fireball to initialize, so it goes through this new velocity and sets the projectile movement to be active. Going through initialize, and then upon actually casting, this sets up the fireball's current location so that it knows where it is at. Then we move to the wall, the fireball wall. So we have the fireball checks for or casts the fireball. If it does, it applies damage to the wall, to itself, and destroys the fireball in the process. The damage is based off of the fireball damage variable that is set in the fireball. This subtracts that damage from the current health of the wall and then sets the new health for the wall. Currently that is set to 1 by default, but could be changed. Then it checks if the wall is 0. If it is less than or equal to 0, it will then update to tile floor so that the wall disappears. There's an actor component that is required. I forgot to mention that when looking at the player entity. Core, blueprints, entities, player. Under entity player, a actor component for the book of spells, as well as a spell start scene component for a spell start location were added. This allows the actual casting, preparation, validation of spells, the spell book, and all to exist. So here we have the add spell custom event. Checks if the spell is in the spell book. If false, then it simply adds a spell to the book, and then sets the current spell count to 0, which means that the player can now cast spells. Going forward, I'd like to figure out and set up multiple spells using this. I was thinking about one that could actually change a basic box entity into my energy shield, which would be an interesting way to interact with the laser that I've created. From there, we have the prepare current spell. Again, it checks if the player can cast spells. If yes, it prepares the current spell. This goes back to the player entity. And the same with the casting of the current spell. It again checks against current spells if they can be cast, and then cast them. Simple functions like the spell and spell book. It gets the name to be of the spell to be checked. Sets a new variable called new spell check. Returns false if spell is not in the spell book. If it returns true, then the spell book is exactly the same. Then it is the same as the new spell, which is what sets up the checking if the spell is in the spell book before adding it. So pair spell, just this is to get the location of the spell, which will be that scene component on the player entity. And then can cast spells is simply does current spell not equal -1, and do you have a spell prepared, thus enabling you to can cast. Let's see, I know that was rather quick, but simply go through, make sure. I did not really change anything other than make an identical fireball in the viewport using just a simple sphere. I took a translucent laser pointer material, put it on there, and then put a fire particle effect. And this is the exact same particle effect that is applied to the fireball pickup. So they are identical in nature. Fireball spell, fireball wall. Oh, yes. There is a integrated BP blueprint interface for both prepare and cast, so that these two commands can be shared amongst all the requirements. So the player, entity, the fireball spell all share those. If we look into the level design, so the concept for this is that the player is initially trapped in a room where they can only open with the fireball spell. If they choose to only open this door and try to leave, they will be gunned down by the laser before they can get out. So the player is encouraged to open up both doors and push the energy shield that was introduced in the first level in the way of the laser. And once again, same concept over here. If they were to try and cross this without blocking the laser, there is a minor chance that they could get across with the perfect timing, but otherwise they need to use the energy shield to block the incoming laser. Finally, with the third room, I added a simple, just reusing the teleport asset so that the player would have to teleport to pick up fireball, teleport back to break their way out. Again, they could attempt to just simply go across, but the laser's firing fast enough that doing so is incredibly difficult. So the player is again encouraged to simply blow out a different wall and go down and push the shield to continue blocking so that they can get to escape. I made this mechanic overall by following Sean's directions and documentation. It was rather difficult at first. I did not have a lot of time to work on this, especially not as much as I would have liked to due to work. But outside of that, it was a lot of fun to work on. I have some ideas on how I would like to make adjustments to it, or completely add new spells, or overall make it a little more interesting in the end. Thank you for watching my presentation.